Picture this. The year is 67 AD. In ancient Rome, the air hangs heavy with the scent of cypress smoke and the suffocating weight of absolute power. Beneath the colossal arches of the Forum, where shadows stretch long and ominous, whispers begin to coil like vipers through the crowds. Tonight, something truly grotesque is unfolding. You see Emperor Nero himself, strolling with his new wife. She is draped in finest silks, adorned with jewels, her features serene in the flickering torchlight. Yet, the Roman gaze holds not admiration, but horrified fascination, suppressed dread. Every soul in that city knows the unspeakable truth. The exquisite woman beside the world's most powerful man was once a boy. A boy named Sporus. What Nero did to him, what he stripped away, mutilated and twisted, represents one of history's most chilling acts of psychological and physical violation. This is no mere tale of Roman excess. It is a descent into the dark heart of obsession, where a human became a living testament to one man's terrifying madness. Tonight, we journey far beyond sanitized history, past grand narratives of glory, into the shadowed corners where unchecked power demands its true price. This is not a story for the faint of heart, nor one to be passively consumed. This is an immersive journey into a chilling reality, a dive into the depths of human depravity and unexpected resilience. You're about to embark on a chronicle challenging perceptions of love, grief, and sanity. We will dissect the twisted logic of an emperor who defied death, reshaping reality to satisfy monstrous desires. We will witness the terrifying elasticity of identity as it's systematically stripped away, piece by agonizing piece, under extreme pressure. This narrative aims not just to inform, but to absorb you completely, transporting your mind from today's distractions into a past so dark, so compelling, it will hold your thoughts captive. Prepare to confront the chilling intersection of absolute authority and absolute madness, where a boy's innocence was sacrificed on an emperor's fractured psyche. This ancient story echoes with profound, unsettling relevance, reminding us of humanity's capacity for both unimaginable cruelty and unbreakable spirit. So, before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely find value in these journeys into the past. And do let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always a privilege to know who is joining us from around the world. The story of Sporus and the emperor who molded him transcends mere sensational anecdote. At its heart, it is a profound study in the nature of power, the consuming fire of grief, and the insidious grip of obsession. When a single individual, unrestrained by morals or law, wields absolute authority, their inner world, their whims, terrors, delusions, becomes devastatingly consequential. Every dark impulse can be enacted without dissent, without consequence. In Nero, we witness a mind actively unravelling under the crushing weight of omnipotence, a soul tormented by the very isolation absolute power brings. And then there is grief, a force so primal it warps reality, even for stable minds. But when that grief belongs to an emperor who believes himself divine, it manifests monstrously, twisting life into a grotesque parody of what was lost. Sporus was not the cause of Nero's madness. Tragically, he was its most poignant symptom, the living canvas upon which a deranged emperor sought to paint over unbearable guilt and sorrow. He became the testament to a ruler's inability to accept loss, a chilling monument to the idea that love, unhinged by power, can become the most destructive force imaginable. This deep dive will explore these very themes, meticulously setting the stage for the terrifying descent of one of Rome's most infamous and psychologically complex emperors. In the sprawling, tumultuous tapestry of ancient Rome, few figures cast a shadow as long and as complex as Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. Yet, to understand the depravity that would later define him, we must first glimpse the young man who ascended the throne at merely 16 years old. Born Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, he was the son of Agrippina the Younger, a woman of ruthless ambition and formidable political cunning. His early years were overshadowed by the intrigues of the imperial court, a viper's nest, where power was seized and held with brutal efficiency. But it was under the watchful, guiding hand of his mother that Nero was groomed for greatness. Agrippina, through cunning and manipulation, secured his adoption by Emperor Claudius, her own uncle and husband, effectively paving his way to the purple. When Claudius died, under circumstances widely whispered to be of Agrippina's making, young Nero became emperor. The initial years of his reign, from 54 to around 59 AD, were lauded by many as a golden age. This early period, often referred to as the Quinquennium Neronis, Nero's 5 years, was surprisingly promising. Unlike the capricious tyranny that would later follow, this era was largely characterized by mild governance and enlightened policies, heavily influenced by two powerful figures, his stoic tutor, Seneca the Younger, and the seasoned praetorian prefect, Sextus Afranius Burrus. Seneca, a brilliant philosopher and orator, sought to instill in Nero the principles of just and moderate rule. He championed the idea of a benevolent princeps, a ruler who governed with wisdom and compassion rather than fear. Burrus, a pragmatic military man, provided the administrative stability and helped contain the ambitious Agrippina, preventing her from overtly dominating the young emperor. Under their guidance, Nero's initial actions seemed to validate the hopes of a weary Roman populace. Taxes were reduced or made more equitable, particularly benefiting the poorer classes. Public entertainment, a crucial tool for maintaining popular favor in Rome, flourished. Nero invested in lavish games, chariot races, and gladiatorial contests, delighting the common people who thronged to the arenas. Furthermore, Nero demonstrated a keen, albeit unconventional interest in the arts. Unlike previous emperors who viewed artistic pursuits as beneath their dignity, Nero embraced them with unbridled enthusiasm. He composed poetry, sang, and famously performed on the lyre, even appearing on public stages, a shocking departure from aristocratic norms. While the Senate, clinging to ancient traditions, often viewed these activities with disdain, the ordinary citizens adored them. They saw an emperor who was relatable, who shared their passions, who dared to break from the stuffy conventions of the elite. His charisma, undeniable in these early years, captivated many. He possessed a theatrical flair, a grandiosity of vision that, at first, manifested as an eagerness to beautify Rome, to bring culture and celebration to its people. He was a patron of architects, commissioning new public works, and advocating for grand, ambitious building projects. His interest in urban planning hinted at a desire to leave a magnificent legacy, to transform Rome into a truly unparalleled capital. He even opened public baths and gymnasiums, further enhancing the lives of ordinary citizens. The populace, weary from decades of political instability and imperial excesses under previous rulers, yearned for a period of calm and prosperity. And for a time, Nero seemed to embody that hope. But even in this nascent golden age, subtle cracks began to appear in the facade, hinting at the darker impulses lying dormant beneath the surface. Nero's artistic passions, while popular, were also tinged with an arrogant self-absorption. He did not merely enjoy performing, he demanded adoration and punished critics. He began to dismiss those who disagreed with him, surrounding himself with flatterers who fed his growing ego. The tension with his mother, Agrippina, also simmered constantly beneath the surface. Having orchestrated his ascent, she fully expected to rule through him, and she grew increasingly frustrated as Nero asserted his own will. Their clashes became more frequent, more public, straining the fabric of the imperial court. Nero, having tasted ultimate power, resented Agrippina's attempts to control him, seeing her not as a guide, but as a rival for authority and a constant reminder of his dependence. The execution of his stepbrother, Britannicus, in 55 AD, widely believed to be ordered by Nero, was the first truly ominous sign. Britannicus was the biological son of Claudius, the previous emperor, and thus a legitimate, direct claimant to the throne. While Nero was adopted and now held power, Britannicus represented a constant, living threat, a potential rallying point for anyone discontent with Nero's rule, or more importantly, with Agrippina's growing influence. Agrippina herself, ever the political chess master, had shown inclinations to favor Britannicus when Nero proved less pliable to her will. This rivalry, and the undeniable fact that Britannicus was growing into manhood, likely fueled Nero's growing insecurity. He saw Britannicus not just as a rival, but as an impediment to his absolute authority and an instrument in his mother's hands. Though publicly justified as an act against a rival claimant, the manner of his death, poison, administered swiftly and cruelly at a banquet, revealed a cold, calculating ruthlessness that shocked even a cynical Roman elite. Seneca and Burrus, aware of Nero's volatile nature, found their influence increasingly tested. They recognized the precarious balance they maintained, constantly walking a tightrope between guiding the young emperor and avoiding his wrath. This act against Britannicus confirmed their deepest fears: Nero's capacity for cold-blooded murder to secure his position. This act marked a pivotal shift, demonstrating that Nero would eliminate any perceived threat, even family, to secure his power. It was a chilling foreshadowing of how absolute power, intoxicating and unchecked, would begin its insidious work, slowly but irrevocably corrupting even the most promising of souls, transforming a beloved prince into a feared tyrant, and setting the stage for horrors that would make the name of Sporus forever inseparable from the depths of imperial depravity. This golden age, it would become horrifyingly clear, was merely the deceptive calm before a storm of madness. The death of Britannicus, chillingly executed at Nero's command, marked the true beginning of the end for the golden age of his reign. It was a line crossed, a moral boundary obliterated, signaling that the young emperor was no longer merely influenced by his advisors, but was actively charting a course towards unchecked self-indulgence and burgeoning tyranny. The subtle cracks in his facade rapidly widened, revealing a mind increasingly untethered from the realities of governance, fixated instead on boundless gratification and the eradication of any perceived obstacle. Seneca and Burrus, the pragmatic Praetorian prefect who had once anchored Nero's early reign, found their grip on Nero's impulses weakening. Their wise counsel and pragmatic guidance, once accepted, now met with growing impatience and outright defiance. Nero's inherent vanity, previously channeled into public works and popular artistic performances, began to swell into a monstrous ego. He became less interested in governing Rome and more obsessed with his personal glorification, seeing himself as an unparalleled artist, a charioteer, a singer whose talent eclipsed all others. The distinction between imperial duty and personal whim dissolved entirely. His performances, once embraced by the common people, grew more frequent, more demanding, and more scandalous to the traditional Roman elite. He forced senators and aristocrats to attend his lengthy recitals, forbidding them from leaving, even for urgent matters. Audience members would feign illness, or even arrange mock funerals, just to escape his relentless artistic displays. The humiliation of the Roman elite was a subtle but potent form of control, forcing them to participate in the charade of his genius. He established festivals, such as the Neronia, explicitly designed for him to compete in, ensuring his inevitable, predetermined victories. His need for applause became insatiable, a hunger that no amount of genuine acclaim could satisfy, only the enforced, terrified adulation of his subjects. But this escalating self-absorption was intertwined with a burgeoning, corrosive paranoia. The more power Nero consolidated, the more isolated he became, and the more deeply he suspected everyone around him. The air of the imperial court, always thick with intrigue, now hummed with genuine fear. Conspiracies, real or imagined, haunted his every waking moment. The Pisonian conspiracy in 65 AD, a vast and audacious plot to overthrow him and replace him with Gaius Calpurnius Piso, a popular senator, burst into the open. This conspiracy involved a wide array of Roman society, from disillusioned senators and equites to military officers, and shockingly, even figures close to Nero, including his former mentor, Seneca, and the epic poet Lucan. The plot was ultimately betrayed, leading to a swift and brutal investigation. This betrayal served only to confirm Nero's darkest suspicions, providing a convenient and horrifying pretext for a sweeping purge. Nero responded with a wave of brutal executions and forced suicides, extending far beyond the actual conspirators to ensnare anyone he vaguely distrusted, resented, or whose wealth he coveted. The atmosphere in Rome became one of pervasive terror, as prominent figures received sudden, chilling orders to take their own lives. The elimination of Agrippina, his formidable mother, stands as a particularly heinous example of this descent. Having once been the architect of his power, she became his most persistent, challenging, and inconvenient critic. Their relationship, always fraught, devolved into open hostility. Nero attempted to drown her in a specially designed collapsible boat, a truly theatrical and cruel scheme. When that failed, he sent assassins to finish the job. Her murder, committed in 59 AD, was a profound shock to Roman society, a clear sign that Nero recognized no bounds, no sacred ties, in his pursuit of absolute control. The matricide, publicly justified with flimsy pretexts, cemented his image as a ruthless tyrant willing to go to any length to remove obstacles, even if that obstacle was the very woman who placed him on the throne. This act plunged Nero deeper into a self-imposed isolation. With Agrippina gone and Burrus dead, likely of natural causes, though conspiracy theories abounded, Seneca found himself increasingly powerless. He tried to temper Nero's excesses, to subtly remind him of moderation, but his words now fell on deaf ears. The guiding hands were gone, and Nero was free to indulge every whim, every dark fantasy that festered in his increasingly disturbed mind. His personal life became a testament to his unchecked desires. He indulged in lavish banquets, extravagant orgies, and nocturnal escapades through Rome, dressed in disguise, often participating in street brawls and robberies. His spending was astronomical, pushing the imperial treasury to its breaking point. He built increasingly opulent villas and demanded unparalleled luxuries, dismissing any advisor who dared to suggest restraint. The public facade of a benevolent ruler was crumbling, replaced by the reality of a gluttonous, insecure despot. This period also saw the rise of individuals who flattered his every conceit, solidifying his detachment from reality. Tigellinus, the new Praetorian prefect, became his chief enabler, facilitating his debauchery and ruthlessly crushing any dissent. These sycophants fed Nero's grandiosity, reinforcing his belief in his own divine right and artistic genius, while simultaneously isolating him from any genuine criticism or honest appraisal. This manufactured reality, woven from flattery and fear, became the air Nero breathed, further distorting his perception of himself and the world around him. The empire, once seemingly on the cusp of a golden age, now drifted precariously on the whims of a single man, a man whose grip on power was matched only by his rapidly loosening grip on sanity. It was this volatile combination of boundless authority and crumbling reason that would soon unleash horrors upon Rome, culminating in acts that remain, to this day, among the most disturbing records of human depravity. As Nero spiraled deeper into his own dark world of self-indulgence and paranoia, a new figure entered his life, one who would become the final catastrophic catalyst for his descent into truly monstrous madness. Poppea Sabina. Her name, even 2 millennia later, still evokes images of breathtaking beauty and dangerous ambition. Poppea was not merely another woman of the Roman elite. She was an enigma, a force of nature whose charisma and political acumen were as sharp as her famed beauty. Born into a distinguished family, she possessed a sophistication and an intellect that few of her peers could match. She was already twice married, with a reputation for both seductive charm and ruthless calculation. She knew the game of power, and she played it with a fearless intensity that both captivated and terrified those around her. When Nero first laid eyes on Poppea, he was already married to Octavia, the daughter of his predecessor, Emperor Claudius. Their union had always been a cold, loveless political arrangement, devoid of genuine affection. Octavia was a woman of quiet virtue, dignified and reserved, deeply loyal to the Julio-Claudian traditions. She represented everything Nero was increasingly rebelling against: duty, tradition, quiet restraint. Poppea, in stark contrast, was vibrant, vivacious, and utterly commanding. Where Octavia sought to avoid attention, Poppea reveled in being the undisputed center of everyone's gaze. She embodied the very qualities Nero was coming to demand in his life: excitement, defiance of convention, and an intoxicating, dangerous freedom. The affair between Nero and Poppea began as a typical Roman scandal, a clandestine liaison that fueled the whispers of the imperial court. But what started as mere adultery quickly evolved into something far more dangerous, far more consuming for the emperor: a genuine, all-encompassing obsession. Nero wasn't just physically attracted to Poppea's beauty, he became entirely consumed by her, in a way that began to deeply alarm even his closest, most cynical advisors. Ancient historians, writing with a mixture of shock and disdain, describe Nero's behavior during this period as increasingly erratic, possessive, and utterly unhinged. He would fly into terrifying, murderous rages if other men so much as looked at Poppea for too long during public functions, a stark testament to his pathological need for absolute ownership. He began stationing guards around her at all times, ostensibly for her protection, but in truth, to monitor her every interaction, every glance. He lavished her with gifts of almost unimaginable opulence, pushing the imperial treasury, already strained by his personal excesses, to its absolute breaking point. Jewels from distant India, the finest silks from the furthest reaches of China, rare and exotic perfumes from Arabia. No expense was spared in his relentless pursuit of her affection, or rather, her complete possession. But perhaps most tellingly, and most chillingly, he began to actively reshape reality itself, bending the very fabric of Roman law and social convention, simply to accommodate the escalating madness of his obsession. First, the inconvenient matter of Octavia had to be dealt with. Nero divorced her, a shocking and deeply unpopular move that immediately alienated many of his most loyal supporters and much of the Roman populace, who sympathized with the virtuous, wronged empress. But divorce was merely the prelude to true horror. Fearing Octavia might remarry and provide a rallying point for dissent, Nero engineered a false accusation of adultery against her, despite its blatant absurdity. When that failed to garner public support for her condemnation, he ordered her exile to the remote island of Pandateria. Even there, far from Rome, Octavia remained a symbol, a beacon for those who despised Nero's tyranny. Finally, in an act of calculated, cold-blooded cruelty, Nero ordered her execution. Her veins were opened, but when she lingered, she was suffocated in a hot bath, and her head was then sent to Poppea, a grotesque trophy delivered to the woman who now held Nero's complete, unhinged devotion. This cold-blooded murder, committed against his own innocent wife, horrified even the hardened Romans and underscored the extent to which Nero would go to eliminate any obstacle to his desires, no matter how innocent or beloved by the people. With Octavia brutally dispatched, Nero announced his intention to marry Poppea in a full, legitimate imperial ceremony, a spectacle designed to legitimize their union in the eyes of the gods and men, despite the widespread public revulsion. The wedding was a display of unprecedented luxury, with Nero sparing no expense to demonstrate his complete, unreserved devotion to his new bride. It was a lavish affair, designed to overwhelm with its splendor, to force acceptance through sheer grandeur. Yet, even marriage, the ultimate formalization of possession, couldn't satisfy Nero's insatiable need to possess Poppea completely. He began to isolate her from her remaining family and friends, surrounding her instead with a court of sycophants and servants who owed their positions entirely to his favor. She became a prisoner of his affection, cut off from any independent counsel or genuine companionship. He commissioned dozens, perhaps hundreds of portraits and sculptures of her, not just for public display in temples and forums, but for his private chambers, so he could look upon her image even when they were apart. Ancient sources tell us that Nero would sometimes spend hours simply watching Poppea as she went about her daily activities, a silent, unnerving vigil that spoke volumes about his pathological state. This was no longer romantic devotion. It was the chilling behavior of someone who had confused love with ownership, who saw another human being not as an independent person with their own will and thoughts, but as a beautiful, breathing object that existed solely for his pleasure and glorification. Poppea, for her part, seemed to understand the extremely dangerous game she was playing. She was intelligent enough to recognize that her beauty and Nero's all-consuming obsession gave her unprecedented, almost terrifying power. But she was also shrewd enough to realize that this power came with enormous, constant risks. She began using her considerable influence to advance her family's interests, carefully building a network of supporters within the imperial court, who she hoped would protect her if Nero's notoriously fickle affections ever wavered, or if his possessiveness turned violent. She navigated the treacherous waters of imperial passion with cunning and a practiced grace. But Poppea had one fatal flaw, one dangerous spark of individuality that would ultimately seal her fate. She wasn't afraid to stand up to Nero. Unlike virtually everyone else in the imperial court, who had long since learned to anticipate the emperor's volatile moods and cater to his every whim, Poppea retained an independence of spirit. She would argue with him about policy decisions, criticize his artistic pursuits, and even, according to some accounts, mock his public performances when she thought they were subpar. Her sharp wit and unwillingness to simply acquiesce to his every pronouncement, once perhaps part of what intrigued him, now began to chafe against his absolute control. It was within this tumultuous relationship that Nero finally had what he craved most: an heir. In January of 63 AD, Poppea gave birth to a daughter, Claudia Augusta. This was Nero's first and only legitimate child, and her birth was met with immense public celebration and relief. To signify her unparalleled importance and establish her claim to divinity, she was immediately deified, declared a goddess, and granted the honorific Augusta, a title usually reserved for reigning empresses. Temples were swiftly erected in her honor, and sacrifices were made throughout the empire. The empire finally had a direct successor, a tiny, seemingly divine symbol of stability in a world growing increasingly erratic. But this fleeting joy was cruelly short-lived. Just 4 months after her birth, Claudia Augusta died, likely from a common infant illness that was untreatable in ancient times. Her death plunged Nero into a profound, almost delusional grief. He mourned her with exaggerated public displays, establishing a cult in her honor, desperate to retain the symbol of an heir he had so briefly possessed. The subsequent final pregnancy of Poppea thus carried an almost unbearable weight. What happened on that fateful day in 65 AD, while Poppea was carrying what would have been their second child, a precious, desperately desired potential heir to the throne, varies depending on which ancient historian you choose to believe. But the tragic outcome was always the same. During what started as a typical domestic argument, some sources say about Nero coming home late from chariot races, others about his theatrical pursuits, the emperor lost control in a way that would haunt him forever. According to Tacitus, the argument escalated when Poppea dared to criticize Nero's priorities, suggesting he cared more about his public image and artistic endeavors than his responsibilities as a husband and father. Perhaps the stress of her pregnancy made her less willing to tolerate Nero's increasingly erratic, unbearable behavior. What happened next has been debated by historians for centuries, but the consensus among ancient sources is chillingly consistent. Nero, in a fit of uncontrollable homicidal rage, either kicked or struck his pregnant wife with such brutal force that she suffered fatal internal injuries. Some accounts suggest it was a single, devastating blow to her abdomen. Others describe a sustained, horrifying attack that left her bleeding and unconscious on the polished marble floor of their palace. Imagine the horrifying, soul-crushing moment when Nero truly realized what he had done. The man who commanded 30 legions, who could have anyone executed with a mere word, who was worshipped as a living god in the eastern provinces, had just destroyed the one thing he claimed to genuinely care about, the woman he had obsessed over. Poppea, his beloved, was dying because of his own uncontrolled, explosive violence. Ancient sources describe the scene that followed as one of the most pathetic and desperate in imperial history. Nero reportedly threw himself on Poppea's lifeless body, alternating between begging her forgiveness and deliriously commanding her to live, as if his imperial authority extended even over death itself. He summoned the best physicians in Rome, offering them unimaginable fortunes to save her life, threatening them with torture if they failed. But it was too late. Poppea died within hours, taking with her the unborn child, who might have been Nero's only legitimate heir. In that moment, something utterly fundamental, something irrevocably vital, broke inside the emperor's already fractured mind. The grief that followed wasn't just emotional devastation. It was a complete and terrifying break with reality, ushering in the darkest, most depraved chapter of his reign. In the immediate aftermath of Poppea Sabina's death, as Nero's mind fractured further into a landscape of denial and delusion, the imperial court became a stage for a grief so monumental, so theatrical, it defied all understanding. The once feared emperor was now a pathetic figure, lost in a labyrinth of self-reproach and a desperate longing to reclaim what his own rage had destroyed. It was during this period of profound, unhinged mourning that a young man named Sporus first entered Nero's line of sight. He entered it not through ambition or intrigue, but through a terrifying twist of fate, an almost cruel echo of the very woman Nero had lost. Sporus, blissfully unaware, was walking into a nightmare from which there would be no true awakening. Sporus was likely around 14 or 15 years old when his life irrevocably changed. Born into slavery within the sprawling, intricate complex of the Imperial household, he was technically a freedman, meaning he had been granted his freedom by the Emperor himself as a child. This position was, in many ways, one of relative privilege compared to the vast majority of Rome's enslaved population. Freedmen in imperial service often enjoyed access to education, training in administrative duties, and opportunities that were entirely denied to freeborn citizens of lower social classes. Their lives could, superficially, appear comfortable, even enviable. However, this privilege came with an insidious, profound cost: complete and utter dependence on imperial favor. A freedman owed everything: his status, his freedom, his very existence as a non-slave, to their former master's generosity. This created a relationship of absolute vulnerability, a chilling bond that transcended mere employment. They could be elevated to positions of immense influence, wield considerable power on behalf of the emperor, but they could also be discarded, severely punished, or even executed on a whim, with virtually no legal recourse or protection. Their loyalty was presumed, their obedience absolute. Sporus, growing up within the gilded cage of the palace walls, would have understood this precarious balance intimately, even if he couldn't have foreseen the horrific true meaning it would one day hold for him. What, then, made Sporus special in the eyes of an emperor consumed by the loss of his beloved empress? It was not his intellect, which was likely keen, nor his administrative skills, which would have been diligently cultivated within the palace. It was, rather, something far more superficial and far more terrifying in its implications: his face. Multiple ancient sources, with a striking and unsettling consensus, agree that the young man bore an uncanny, almost supernatural resemblance to the dead Poppea Sabina. The likeness was particularly striking around the eyes, with their delicate shape and expressive quality, and in the delicate bone structure of his face. It was a resemblance that, in a world where Romans believed physical likeness could indicate a deeper spiritual or familial connection, would have seemed nothing short of miraculous, a sign from the gods themselves. The first time Nero saw Sporus after Poppea's death, something profoundly, irrevocably clicked in the emperor's already broken, delusion-riddled mind. Here, in the physical form of this innocent boy, was a chance, or so his madness whispered, to undo the irreversible. Here was a way to bring back what his own violent rage had so brutally destroyed. The resemblance was so striking, so precise, that for a fleeting, terrifying moment, Nero may have actually believed he was seeing Poppea's very spirit, returned in a new, unexpected, and pliable form. It was a vision born of despair and absolute power, a seed planted in the fertile ground of a mind that had already severed its ties with reality, ready to grow into a truly monstrous fantasy. He had found his living doll, a vessel to rebuild his lost love, no matter the cost to the boy imprisoned within. The resemblance was too uncanny, the longing in Nero's heart too profound, and his power too absolute for any rational thought to prevail. For a man who had convinced himself he was a god, who had spent months talking to the preserved corpse of his beloved empress, merely changing someone's attire seemed like a trivial, insufficient obstacle. Nero didn't just decide to force Sporus to dress as a woman. He decided to make the transformation permanent, a terrifying, irreversible metamorphosis designed to resurrect his lost love in living flesh. What happened next represents one of the most calculated, systematic acts of cruelty and psychological annihilation in human history. The emperor summoned the best physicians in Rome, highly skilled practitioners of ancient medicine, but men utterly beholden to his capricious will. His command was chillingly precise. Perform surgery on the young man, purely to make him appear more feminine, to strip away any vestige of his biological male identity. This was not a medical procedure for health or necessity. It was an act of mutilation, a systematic destruction of Sporus's very self, a violent erasure of his innate being. The procedure in question was castration. In Roman society, castration, while not widespread, was known, often performed on slaves to create eunuchs for specific roles, as guardians of harems, chamberlains, or servants who could be trusted with access to imperial women without posing a sexual threat. Sometimes it was done to preserve a youthful appearance or voice, but for Sporus, the purpose was horrifyingly unique and perverse. It was to physically alter him to better resemble a woman, to fulfill a dead woman's role. Ancient surgical procedures were, by modern standards, primitive, brutal, and terrifyingly dangerous. They relied on basic instruments, crude forms of pain management, and a rudimentary understanding of hygiene. The process would have been agonizing, excruciatingly painful, lasting for what must have felt like an eternity. The risk of death from infection, shock, or catastrophic blood loss was immense. Even if Sporus survived the initial trauma, he would be forever changed, physically, irrevocably altered, emotionally, profoundly scarred, and socially, relegated to a liminal, unnatural state. He would never father children, never experience normal heterosexual relationships as a Roman male, never even be truly considered fully male by the rigid standards of Roman society. He would become, effectively, a living ghost of his former self, trapped in a body and a role that were not his own. The surgery itself took place within the Imperial palace, in quarters specifically prepared for this horrific purpose, isolated from the prying eyes of the curious or the compassionate. Imagine the scene. Sporus, a young, vulnerable boy, held down, perhaps by Imperial guards, as physicians, their faces grim and impassive, approached with their instruments. He would have known, with a horrifying certainty, that his screams would fall on deaf ears, that no one would intervene. The Emperor's will was absolute. Once Sporus had miraculously recovered from the immediate trauma, a grueling process that would have taken weeks or even months of painful convalescence, Nero was far from finished. The physical alteration was merely the first step. The emperor then announced something that shocked even the most jaded and cynical Roman aristocrats. He was going to marry the young man in a full, legitimate imperial wedding ceremony. This was not a private affair. This was a public declaration, a grotesque statement of his absolute power to dictate reality itself. The preparations for this abhorrent union took months and consumed enormous resources from the already strained imperial treasury. Sporus was given a new name, one dripping with dark irony, Sabina, after the dead empress. He was then moved to special quarters within the palace, a luxurious prison where he could be meticulously prepared for his new, terrifying role. Imperial seamstresses, the finest artisans in Rome, were commissioned to create an entire wardrobe specifically for him. They designed exquisite gowns, draped in the flowing styles fashionable among aristocratic Roman women, meticulously tailored to flatter his modified physique and, crucially, to cunningly conceal any remaining masculine characteristics. These weren't just clothes, they were instruments of his erasure. Master jewelers crafted ornaments specifically for him, many incorporating the very gems that had once adorned Poppea herself. These weren't just accessories either. They were tangible, shimmering links to the dead woman, binding Sporus inextricably to a ghost. The weight of these jewels, shimmering with cold light, must have felt like veritable shackles. Artists painted portraits, sculptors carved busts, all immortalizing Sabina, the new empress, further cementing the perverse fiction. But the physical adornments were only part of the torture. Sporus was subjected to a rigorous regimen designed to systematically obliterate his original identity and replace it with a feminine persona. Highly skilled makeup artists taught him cosmetic techniques, instructing him on how to use kohl, a dark powder, often made from antimony or soot, used to darken eyelids and lashes, to make his eyes appear larger and more alluring, how to apply rouge for rosy, delicate cheeks, how to use various powders to soften his facial angles and blur any masculine sharpness. These lessons weren't just about superficial appearance, they were exercises in the complete, systematic erasure of his original self, forcing him to witness a stranger staring back from every mirror. Hairdressers instructed him in elaborate styling techniques, fashionable among aristocratic Roman women. His hair was cut, painstakingly curled, and arranged in complex patterns, often incorporating expensive, intricate ornaments. This process could take hours daily, requiring the dedicated work of multiple servants and the use of heated metal tools, a ritualized act of transformation performed day after day. But perhaps most psychologically damaging were the lessons in feminine behavior and deportment. Sporus was assigned dedicated tutors, experts in social graces, who taught him how to walk, how to sit, and how to gesture in appropriately ladylike ways. He learned how to hold his hands, how to position his feet, how to arrange his clothing when seated, how to move through space conveying grace and softness rather than masculine strength. Voice coaches, masters of rhetoric and elocution, worked tirelessly with him to modify his speech patterns, teaching him to speak in higher tones, to soften his vocal delivery, and to adopt linguistic mannerisms specifically associated with feminine discourse. This was perhaps the most challenging and invasive aspect of his transformation, as vocal patterns are deeply ingrained and extraordinarily difficult to change consciously, representing a core part of one's identity. Can you begin to imagine the unrelenting psychological torture of this transformation? Every single day, Sporus was forced to look into mirrors, reflecting back the image of a stranger wearing his own face, a stranger he was compelled to become. Every lesson in feminine behavior was a chilling, constant reminder that his true identity was being systematically and violently erased. Every piece of jewelry, every silken gown that had once adorned a dead woman was now a shackle binding him to a role he never chose, a grotesque role imposed by an emperor's fractured mind. He was being made into the ultimate living doll, a puppet controlled by the strings of Nero's delusion. He was no longer Sporus. He was a vessel, a blank canvas upon which a madman painted his lost love. His very existence became a performance, a terrifying, never-ending act of impersonation of. Nero was ready to complete his twisted fantasy. The transformation of Sporus was merely the prelude. Now, the emperor intended a public declaration, a grotesque statement of absolute power to dictate reality itself, bending nature and society to his will. The preparations for this abhorrent union consumed months and siphoned enormous resources from the Imperial treasury, already strained to its breaking point by Nero's insatiable appetite for luxury. Every detail was meticulously planned, every expense justified by Nero's unhinged insistence on grandeur. Sporus, now bearing the ironic and haunting name of Sabina, the very name of the dead empress, was ensconced in lavish new quarters within the sprawling palace complex. These rooms, designed with opulent splendor, served as a gilded cage, a luxurious prison where he could be meticulously prepared for his new, terrifying role. Imperial seamstresses, the finest artisans in Rome, worked tirelessly to create an entire new wardrobe for him. They designed exquisite gowns, draped in the flowing styles fashionable among aristocratic Roman women. These garments were not merely beautiful, they were meticulously tailored to flatter his modified physique and, crucially, to cunningly conceal any remaining masculine characteristics. Each silken fold, each artfully placed drape, was an instrument of his erasure, a deliberate deception. Master jewelers crafted ornaments specifically for him, intricate necklaces, elaborate diadems, bracelets that coiled around his slender wrists. Many of these pieces incorporated the very gems that had once adorned Poppea herself, physical links to the dead woman, binding Sporus inextricably to a ghost. The weight of these jewels, shimmering with cold light, must have felt like veritable shackles. Artists painted portraits, sculptors carved busts, all immortalizing Sabina, the new empress, further cementing the perverse fiction. The wedding was scheduled for the spring of 67 AD, timed to coincide with auspicious religious festivals that would add a layer of ceremonial weight and false solemnity to the proceedings. Nero spared no expense, treating it as a truly legitimate imperial wedding, one worthy of the greatest emperor in Roman history. Or so he believed. The ceremony itself took place in the grandest hall of the imperial palace, a vast space transformed into a dazzling, fragrant spectacle. Thousands of imported flowers, exotically scented and vibrant, adorned every surface. Thousands of oil lamps cast a warm, flickering glow, illuminating frescoes and gilded statues. Musicians played traditional Roman wedding songs, their melodies echoing through the vast space, while servants glided silently, offering the finest wines and delicacies to the assembled guests. To any outside observer who was unaware of the horrifying truth, it might have appeared to be a normal, albeit extraordinarily lavish, imperial wedding. But those in the know, the seasoned courtiers, the cynical senators, the weary advisors, understood with chilling clarity that they were witnessing something unprecedented, something fundamentally disturbing. Here was the most powerful man in the world, publicly marrying a surgically modified teenage boy, dressed as his dead wife. The absurdity was matched only by the horror. The ceremony included all the traditional Roman rituals, the exchanging of vows, the formal joining of hands, the breaking and sharing of sacred bread, and the signing of solemn legal documents that made this monstrous union officially recognized under Roman law. The guests, masters of political survival, played their parts with accomplished acting skills. They offered their congratulations, their forced smiles barely concealing a mixture of revulsion, fascination, and nervous terror. They presented extravagant gifts, murmuring appropriate blessings, while an atmosphere thick with barely concealed horror, morbid curiosity, and the nervous energy that comes from participating in something profoundly, fundamentally wrong hung heavy in the air. Each forced pleasantry, each superficial gesture of celebration, only served to highlight the depths of Nero's psychological break from reality and the terrifying subservience of those around him. Following the wedding, Nero treated Sporus exactly as he would a legitimate empress. The young man received his own vast household staff, a retinue of dozens of servants dedicated solely to his comfort and needs. He was granted opulent private quarters within the palace complex, rooms decorated to Nero's specific delusional instructions, often mirroring those of the late Poppea. He received a significant income from the imperial treasury, vast sums to manage his household and support his newfound station. He was given his own litter for traveling, borne by strong, uniformed slaves, and magnificent horses for riding, a full retinue to accompany him on all public appearances. But all this apparent luxury came with a terrible, soul-destroying price: the complete erasure of his original identity and the relentless, constant performance of a psychologically devastating role. Sporus was expected to accompany Nero to all public functions, to sit beside him at state dinners, and to play the part of the devoted empress in all interactions, both public and private. This wasn't merely about appearances or formality. Nero genuinely seemed to believe he had successfully resurrected Poppea. He would call Sporus by his dead wife's name, reminisce about shared memories that had never actually happened, and expect responses that maintained the elaborate, fragile fiction. For Sporus, every single day became a high-stakes performance, a terrifying tightrope walk where the slightest mistake in demeanor, the smallest slip of the tongue, could mean instant death. He had to remember not just how to look and act like a woman, but how to respond as if he were Poppea herself. When Nero mentioned events from his previous marriage with Poppea, Sporus had to react as if he remembered them personally, recalling details that were entirely foreign to his own experience. Ancient sources describe Sporus as becoming increasingly skilled at this dangerous deception, developing an almost supernatural ability to anticipate Nero's volatile moods and respond appropriately, to perfectly embody the ghost of the emperor's lost love. Yet, these same historians also note that he grew increasingly withdrawn, melancholic, and tragically silent as time passed, a quiet despair settling over him. Though he continued playing his assigned role perfectly in public, the psychological strain, the sheer unending torment, is almost impossible to fully comprehend. Every morning, Sporus woke in rooms decorated to remind him of a dead woman he'd never met. Every mirror reflection bore no resemblance to his original appearance, only the imposed image of Sabina. Every conversation, every interaction required pretending to be someone else, having memories and experiences that weren't his own. For over 2 years, Sporus lived this bizarre, soul-crushing existence, a prisoner of Nero's madness. For over 2 years, Sporus lived this bizarre, soul-crushing existence, a prisoner of Nero's madness. But his ordeal was far from over. In fact, it reached new heights of public absurdity and degradation when Nero decided to embark on a grand tour of Greece. The years immediately preceding this journey, roughly 64 to 66 AD, had been tumultuous and had further cemented Nero's reputation for both immense cruelty and boundless hubris. In July of 64 AD, the infamous Great Fire of Rome erupted, consuming vast swathes of the city for nearly a week. While the precise cause remains debated, whether accidental or ordered by Nero himself, rumors instantly swelled that the emperor had watched the inferno from a distance, performing his own composition, the Sack of Ilium, on his lyre. Regardless of his direct culpability, his response was telling. He promptly seized vast areas of the devastated city centre, not for public rebuilding, but to construct his sprawling, unimaginably extravagant new palace, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. This colossal complex, adorned with gold leaf, precious stones, and a colossal statue of himself, was an act of breathtaking self-indulgence amid widespread suffering. It showcased his architectural megalomania and his complete disregard for the Roman people's plight, further alienating the populace and the Senate. This period also saw the intensification of his persecution of Christians, scapegoated for the fire, subjected to horrific tortures, and set ablaze to illuminate his gardens. These events confirmed Nero's escalating detachment from reality, his unchecked power allowing him to reshape the very landscape of Rome and human suffering to fit his grandiose vision. It was after these seismic events, driven by a desperate need for uncritical adoration, that Nero turned his gaze to Greece. The emperor, consumed by his unshakable belief in his own unparalleled artistic genius, yearned for a stage worthy of his talents. He envisioned himself as the ultimate artist emperor, a new Apollo, the revered Greek and Roman god of music, poetry, light, healing, and prophecy. For Nero, portraying himself as Apollo was not mere theatrics. It was a profound statement of his self-perceived divinity and his role as the ultimate patron and embodiment of culture and light. He believed his performances would transcend mere entertainment and achieve divine acclaim, validating his very existence. He was convinced that the Greeks, with their ancient appreciation for the arts and their tradition of public competition, would finally offer him the genuine adoration and recognition he felt was denied to him by the cynical Roman elite. Naturally, Sporus was compelled to accompany him. The young man, still immaculately dressed as Poppea Sabina and referred to as Empress Sabina, was paraded before foreign dignitaries, kings, and philosophers as the legitimate Empress of Rome. Imagine the scene: venerable Greek aristocrats, heirs to centuries of intellectual and artistic tradition, trying desperately to make sense of their Roman conqueror. Here was this imposing figure, the master of the Western world, traveling with a surgically modified teenage boy, dressed as a woman, demanding that everyone treat this blatant, grotesque fiction as undisputed reality. The cultural shock, the suppressed bewilderment, the thinly veiled disdain of the Greeks must have been immense. Yet they, like the Romans, were forced to indulge the emperor's madness, their very survival dependent on their ability to flatter his colossal ego. Nero competed in almost every major Greek festival: the Olympic, Pythian, Isthmian, and Nemean games, performing as a singer, a lyre player, and even as a charioteer. He famously insisted on competing in the 10-horse chariot race, despite having little skill, nearly being thrown from his chariot, yet still being awarded the victory. He decreed that all past victors of the Olympic Games should be annulled, and only he, Nero, should be recognized as the true Olympic champion. He won an astounding 1,800 crowns, all bestowed upon him by Greek judges who understood the profound risk of not recognizing the emperor's talent. Sporus was a constant presence at his side during these spectacles, a silent, beautiful echo of his lost love, a living testament to his power to shape even human identity to his will. But while Nero indulged his artistic fantasies in Greece, back in Rome and across the vast Roman Empire, the foundations of his power were crumbling. His prolonged absence, his colossal expenditures, and his increasing indifference to effective governance created a power vacuum and fueled widespread discontent. His bizarre personal life and public humiliations of the Roman elite had alienated the very people who traditionally supported the imperial system. The treasury was empty, the military restless, and the provinces chafed under his tyrannical decrees. By 68 AD, the widespread resentment finally erupted into open rebellion. The first major revolt ignited in Gaul, led by Gaius Julius Vindex, a Roman governor disgusted by Nero's excesses. Soon after, Servius Sulpicius Galba, the governor of Hispania Tarraconensis, modern-day Spain, joined the rebellion, gaining momentum and support from various legions. The Praetorian Guard, the elite imperial bodyguard, who had once been Nero's staunch supporters, lost faith in their erratic emperor. Their prefect, Nymphidius Sabinus, sensing the shifting winds of power, openly declared his opposition to Nero's continued rule. The news reached Nero in Greece, plunging him into a state of bewildered panic. He initially dismissed the threats, confident in his divine mandate. But as reports grew more dire, his theatrical flair gave way to paralyzing indecision and despair. He returned to Italy, only to find the situation spiraling out of his control. The legions were deserting him. The Senate, emboldened by the revolts and the Praetorian Guard's defection, finally condemned him as a public enemy, a hostis publicus. This declaration was a death sentence, meaning anyone could kill him without legal consequence. Stripped of all support, facing inevitable capture, Nero finally fled Rome with a small, desperate group of loyal freedmen and servants, and, incredibly, Sporus was among them. Even facing his imminent downfall and death, the emperor could not bring himself to leave behind his living reminder of Poppea, his manufactured empress. They holed up in a villa outside Rome, owned by one of his freedmen, waiting for either a miraculous rescue or the inevitable capture that would lead to his brutal execution. While there, Nero alternated between pathetic despair, suicidal indecision, and grandiose, theatrical preparations for his own death, agonizing over the artist the world was about to lose. When word came that the enemy was closing in, that the Praetorian Guard was literally at the villa's gates, Nero finally chose death over capture and public humiliation. With a trembling hand, and with the reluctant help of his private secretary, Epaphroditus, he plunged a dagger into his throat, uttering his famous last words, "Qualis artifex pereo." What an artist dies in me. He died on June 9th, 68 AD, at the age of 30, bringing an end to the Julio-Claudian dynasty and ushering in a year of chaos and civil war, known as the Year of the Four Emperors. But Nero's suicide, while ending his own tormented reign, left Sporus in an unimaginably vulnerable position. As one of the most visible and bizarre symbols of Nero's depraved reign, he was both a valuable, exotic prize for whoever claimed power next, and a dangerous living liability. The human doll, once the sole property of a mad emperor, was now adrift, cast into the merciless currents of Roman politics, his horrific ordeal far from over. Nero's dramatic suicide, an act of final, pathetic hubris, brought his tumultuous reign to an end. But for Sporus, the human doll, the nightmare was far from over. In fact, Nero's death thrust him into an even more precarious and terrifying existence. As one of the most visible, and certainly one of the most bizarre symbols of Nero's depraved reign, he was instantly transformed from a private obsession into a public spectacle. He was both a valuable, exotic prize for whoever claimed power next, a tangible relic of the fallen tyrant, and a dangerous, living liability, a stark reminder of the recent, scandalous past. The boy, once confined to Nero's personal madness, was now adrift, cast into the merciless, unpredictable currents of Roman politics, his horrific ordeal set to continue. The year that followed Nero's death, 69 AD, would become known as the Year of the Four Emperors. Rome plunged into a brutal and chaotic civil war, as powerful generals and opportunistic politicians vied for the imperial throne. It was a period of extreme instability, rapid shifts in power, and widespread bloodshed. And in this maelstrom, Sporus, tragically, became a political pawn, passed from one powerful man to another like valuable, if unsettling, property. He was a piece on a chessboard, devoid of agency, yet embodying immense symbolic weight. The first to claim him was Nymphidius Sabinus, the Praetorian prefect who had betrayed Nero and played a key role in his downfall. Sabinus, seeing an opportunity to consolidate his own power and perhaps emulate Nero's lifestyle, immediately took possession of Sporus. He maintained the charade, keeping the young man dressed as a woman and referring to him by Poppea's name, Sabina. For Sporus, this must have been a sickening continuation of his torment. The emperor was dead, but the role, the forced identity, remained. Sabinus, however, was quickly eliminated by the legions who favoured Galba, the former governor of Spain, who was declared the new emperor. Under the new emperor Galba, Sporus found himself in a state of precarious and deeply uncertain limbo. Galba, an aging, austere military man, had absolutely no interest in Nero's perverse indulgences or his theatrical, depraved court. His reign was driven by a grim determination to restore traditional Roman values, enforce strict discipline, and bring financial solvency back to the depleted imperial treasury. In this new, severe environment, Sporus, with his overtly feminine attire and his haunting resemblance to the despised Nero's dead wife, was a highly visible, deeply unsettling artifact of the previous regime. He was not immediately subjected to new forms of degradation or overt cruelty, but he remained a silent, living trophy of Nero's downfall, an awkward and unwelcome presence. He was essentially held captive, a political prisoner whose very existence was a stark reminder of the chaos and moral decay Galba sought to eradicate. His fate hung perpetually in the balance, uncertain in the rapidly changing, unforgiving political landscape, a chilling demonstration that his value lay solely in his symbolic connection to power, not in his own personhood. Galba's reign, however, was short-lived. His severe policies and unpopular decisions quickly alienated the Praetorian Guard, who soon turned their allegiance to Otho. Otho, a former companion of Nero and a man known for his own extravagant and debauched lifestyle, seized power in January 69 AD, engineering Galba's murder. With Otho on the throne, Sporus's situation took another chilling turn. Otho, who had a known fondness for all things Neronian, was reportedly quite enamored with Sporus. He immediately took the young man into his personal care, treating him much as Nero had, maintaining the illusion of Empress Sabina. He kept Sporus dressed in women's attire and even publicly associated with him, further perpetuating the grotesque performance. For a brief, terrifying period, it seemed Sporus was condemned to relive his nightmare, albeit under a new master who perhaps possessed a different, but no less suffocating form of obsession. The whispers of the court revived. Would Otho become another Nero, complete with his own living doll? But Otho's rule too was fleeting. Within months, he faced a formidable challenge from Vitellius, a general commanding the legions in Germania, who marched on Rome. Otho suffered a decisive defeat at the First Battle of Bedriacum, and displaying an unexpected, almost Roman sense of dignity, chose to commit suicide rather than prolong the civil war. It was under Vitellius, the gluttonous and cruel new emperor, that Sporus's nightmare reached its ultimate, most public and most horrifying conclusion. Vitellius, unlike Otho, had no personal affection for Nero's tastes. Instead, he saw Sporus as a living embodiment of Nero's degeneracy, a symbol ripe for public humiliation and mockery. He decided to use Sporus for public entertainment in the Roman Colosseum, the grand arena where gladiators fought to the death, and spectacles of every kind thrilled the Roman masses. Specifically, Vitellius planned to include Sporus in a reenactment of a mythological scene, one involving explicit violence and public sexual humiliation. The precise nature of the planned spectacle is horrific to contemplate, but ancient sources indicate it involved Sporus playing the role of a maiden who was to be publicly violated. For Sporus, this represented the ultimate, unthinkable degradation. He had endured physical mutilation, the systematic erasure of his identity, years of forced performance as a dead empress, and the trauma of being passed between emperors like property. But to be sexually humiliated in front of thousands, for their amusement, in the very heart of the Roman world, this was a bridge too far. Sporus was a survivor. He had survived castration, years of psychological torture, and the fall of the most powerful man in the world. He had mastered the art of deception and subservience to navigate an impossible existence. But in this moment, facing this final, ultimate and public humiliation, a flicker of his original self, a profound spark of defiant agency, reignited. Rather than submit to this final, soul-destroying degradation, Sporus made the only choice that was truly his own in years. He refused. He chose freedom from torment, even if that freedom could only be found in oblivion. Sometime in 69 AD, likely by poison, Sporus took his own life. He was probably no more than 20 years old. In death, Sporus finally escaped the grotesque theatre that had consumed his young life. His suicide was not an act of despair born of weakness, but a profound final act of defiance against a world that sought to utterly destroy his essence. It was his last, desperate claim to his own identity, a refusal to be degraded further, even at the cost of his very existence. He died as himself, not as Nero's empress, nor as Vitellius's public mockery. The story of Sporus, from his fateful resemblance to his tragic, defiant end, serves as more than just a macabre anecdote from ancient Rome. It is a chilling, stark illustration of the profound, terrifying paradox of absolute power. When a single individual, untethered by law, morality, or even sane counsel, holds sway over an entire empire, their personal madness, their private delusions, their most twisted fantasies cease to be merely personal. They become, frighteningly, public policy. They are etched onto the very fabric of society, imposed upon the lives of millions, inflicting untold and often unimaginable suffering. The boundaries between a ruler's inner psychological landscape and the external world melt away, leading to a reign of caprice, fear, and utterly arbitrary cruelty. Nero's story, particularly through the lens of his relationship with Sporus, forces us to confront this terrifying truth. His grief, a raw and human emotion, was twisted by his omnipotence into an instrument of horrific violation. His desire to resurrect a lost love mutated into the systematic dehumanization of another. The very isolation that came with his supreme authority left him vulnerable to his own unravelling mind, surrounded only by sycophants who reinforced his delusions rather than challenging them. In such an environment, the absurd becomes law, the depraved becomes spectacle, and the utterly horrific becomes merely another day in the Imperial court. But Sporus's story also compels us to reflect on the vast multitude of forgotten victims, the countless individual tragedies that are too often swallowed by the grand narratives of history. History books, by their very nature, tend to focus on the powerful, on emperors and generals, on momentous battles and political intrigues. The ordinary lives, the personal suffering, the quiet endurance of those caught in the maelstrom of imperial ambition often remain unrecorded, unheard, utterly lost to time. Sporus is, in a way, a rare and chilling exception. His story survived, not because he was powerful, but precisely because he became such an extreme, visible, and grotesque symbol of Nero's decadence. He stands as a poignant reminder that beneath the grandeur of empires, behind the marble facades and the triumphs, There are always individual human stories of immense suffering, sacrifice, and the relentless struggle to retain one's essence in the face of dehumanization. He is a testament to the fact that even in the most well-documented periods, the most profound personal agonies can remain largely unexamined, waiting for us to uncover them. His ordeal forces us to grapple with the very nature of identity itself. Sporus was a boy, a freedman, with his own burgeoning sense of self, his own potential future. Yet, from the moment Nero declared he resembled Poppea, his identity ceased to be his own. It became a canvas for the emperor's twisted fantasies, a role imposed with surgical precision and relentless psychological conditioning. What does it mean to be human when your physical form is altered against your will, when your very name is stripped away, when you are forced to embody a dead person's memory, to perform a life that is not your own, and to deny your own gender? Sporus's story challenges our most fundamental assumptions about the fluidity and vulnerability of identity when it is subjected to overwhelming external pressures and the absolute power of another. His fight, culminating in his final act, was a desperate, ultimately successful reclamation of that lost self, a defiant assertion of his true essence against the forces that sought to obliterate him entirely. These dark, twisted tales, far from being mere sensationalism, endure and continue to resonate with us across millennia for profound reasons. For those of us who seek a narrative to absorb our minds before sleep, they offer a unique and powerful form of mental transport. They pull us away from the anxieties and mundane stresses of our own lives, immersing us in a past so distant, so extreme, that our own problems can momentarily recede. There's a certain catharsis in exploring the abyss of human nature from a safe distance, a morbid curiosity satisfied by confronting history's darkest impulses without personal danger. The horror in Sporus's story, and indeed in the wider narrative of Nero's unravelling, is not just in the shocking acts themselves. It lies in the chilling realization of what human beings are capable of, both in inflicting and enduring. It speaks to the terrifying fragility of normalcy and the seductive, destructive nature of unchecked power. These narratives function as a kind of historical therapy, offering a space to explore the outer limits of the human condition, allowing us to confront our fears and curiosities about the darker aspects of our shared past, without them intruding upon our peace. They provide a powerful, immersive distraction, drawing us into a narrative so compelling, so unsettling, that it leaves little room for other thoughts, preparing the mind for a different kind of quietude as the echoes of ancient madness fade into the night. And so, we bring our long, dark journey to a close, the echoes of ancient madness fading, but the chilling lessons lingering. The story of Sporus is a testament to the most profound vulnerabilities of the human spirit when confronted with unchecked, monstrous power. From an innocent boy, he was systematically stripped of his identity, subjected to mutilation, and forced into a grotesque performance as the living ghost of a dead empress. His ordeal, from Nero's obsessive fantasy to his final, desperate act of defiance, serves as a stark, unforgettable reminder of the human cost of tyranny. Nero's reign, particularly through the lens of Sporus's suffering, paints a terrifying portrait of a mind unhinged by absolute authority and consumed by a grief it refused to acknowledge. His inability to accept loss, his desperate need to reshape reality to fit his twisted desires, led him down a path of increasing depravity, culminating in acts that remain shocking even to our modern sensibilities. The empire he ruled became a reflection of his own fracturing psyche, where terror and theatricality intertwined, leaving a legacy of chaos and cruelty. Yet, Within the profound darkness of Sporus's story, there is also a chilling, quiet power. His ultimate choice, to embrace death rather than endure further degradation, was his final, most profound act of self-reclamation. It was a refusal to allow his tormentors the satisfaction of his complete annihilation. In that moment, he transcended the role of the human doll and asserted the enduring, undeniable spark of his original self, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, even when pushed beyond the limits of imagination. He found agency not in life, but in his exit from it, finally escaping the grotesque theatre that had consumed him. These journeys into history's darkest corners, tales of imperial madness and forgotten tragedies, hold an enduring power. They are not merely gruesome curiosities, but profound explorations of human nature at its most extreme. For those of us who seek a narrative to truly absorb our minds, to offer a different kind of escape from the anxieties of our modern lives, these stories serve as a powerful conduit. They draw us into worlds far removed from our own, allowing our thoughts to be consumed by the chilling details of a distant past. There is a unique solace, a strange fascination in confronting such profound darkness from a safe distance. It's an intellectual curiosity that allows us to explore the abyss of human cruelty, the depths of obsession, and the resilience of the spirit without personal danger. As the echoes of Rome's ancient depravities settle, and the image of Sporus, the boy who became a queen, recedes into the shadows of history, we are left with a quiet reflection. These are the stories that linger, that prompt uncomfortable questions, and ultimately, that remind us of the precious fragility of human identity and the terrifying consequences when it falls into the hands of absolute unhinged power. They are designed to stay with you, guiding your thoughts away from the mundane as you prepare to transition into the deep quiet of the night.